Hi guys, Justin Kemple here, and this is Manuscript History. Let's go ahead and talk about medieval battles. Hi guys, I just wanted to make a quick note today on battles throughout the medieval period. Specifically, I wanted to talk about how common battles were in the Middle Ages. And really, before I do that, I do want to clarify what exactly I mean by battle. I'm not talking about a small skirmish or a siege that might involve a couple dozen men or even maybe 100 men. I do believe things like that were very common at the time. What I mean here is two armies lining up against each other in the open field, exactly like you might see in a movie, for example. And now, I know what you were thinking. People in the medieval period, in the Middle Ages, were always fighting, right? Any given day, tons of people must have died from big pitched battles with thousands or tens of thousands of men marching all across Europe, right? Well, not exactly. Sorry to burst your guys' bubble, but big pitched battles like you see in the movies with thousands of men or tens of thousands of men weren't very common at all. In fact, they were pretty rare. But what about the Battle of Hastings, for example, or Agincourt, Bosworth Hill, maybe the Siege of Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks? Well, yes, battles like these did obviously happen, and unfortunately many people were killed in these cases, but they tended to be decades or even in some cases hundreds of years apart from each other. And they really dramatically shaped the politics of the region for potentially decades to come in most cases. And that's a big part of the problem here, how decisive a battle like this can be for one side or the other. You have to realize, guys, that people in the Middle Ages were no less intelligent than we are today, and they had no more to desire to die by being stabbed by a spear than you or me, or anybody for that matter. Many people seem to have this misbelief that pitched battles were the most important part of medieval warfare, and that armies of knights, men-at-arms, and kings just roamed around and occasionally encountered each other out in the field. The battle would then turn into some confusing melee with no real thought at all to tactics, and just a bunch of guys running into each other with swords. But all of this couldn't really be further from the truth. If we take a look at what the primary sources, they tell a very different story here. It seems that most commanders of the time would have adopted a strategy mostly of avoiding battles rather than seeking any out. When we look at, for example, like I mentioned earlier, the Battle of Bosworth, for example, Richard III here was brutally killed fighting for his life. And I think we can probably talk about that in another video because it's quite fascinating. But this meant that there was a loss of the king and a loss of the cause of the war to begin with. Nobody wanted to lose such a decisive moment in history like that, and therefore obviously suffer all the consequences that come along. For example, if you take a look at Flanders, which is one of the most invaded areas in the medieval times from the years to 1071 to 1328, there's really only about 10 battles that are of any noteworthiness. Battles were something that obviously didn't just randomly happen either. There would have been intense intelligence gathering at all stages of the conflict. Much thought would have been put into the logistics, for example, of moving the army around, the strategy at which they would advance and confront other armies, and the gathering of any resources along the way to sustain the army. Also, for example, sometimes the recruitment of new soldiers. If commanding knights and kings were all just brainless people that were ronding around Europe looking for battles, I think they probably would have all died out long before we ever heard of them or anything of note happened to them. Another big reason that you don't see many battles with thousands of men, for example, is in which the context that a lot of these, what I like to call micro wars across Europe, were fought. The traditional goal of many of these military activities was typically just to capture and defend a new fortified position, and that was the end of it. Wealth at the time was judged by the land that you owned primarily, and not necessarily by the amount of gold you had. This meant that medieval warfare was typically contained to that goal, the one of taking over another small fortified position, or a castle, as you might say. The other issue is that soldiers obviously needed to be fed. They obviously needed to be paid too. Nobody's going to go fight for nothing. And the gathering of any of these forces were usually the task of the nobleman themselves or a knight and his retinue. not generally of the king or state, and armies tended to be quite small because of this. It wasn't until the late Middle Ages that state-funded and standing armies started to be more common. Alright guys, so I know this is supposed to be a quick video, so to summarize real quick, medieval battles tended to be very rare, but they were usually quite decisive. For example, at the Battle of Agincourt, over 6,000 Frenchmen lost their lives, in which that was absolutely devastating to the French aristocracy at the time. This led, of course, to Henry V being recognized as the heir to the throne of France and the regent of France in 1420. And like Agincourt, in addition to experience, unfortunately, many battles are decided by chance. If it hadn't been raining the day or the weeks before, would the French have won the Battle of Agincourt? We don't really know. A straight arrow, arrow shot, a fog, a blizzard in one case. There are too many variables to make a battle worth it for most generals. I'll go ahead and end the video today with a quote from the Epitome of Military Science. This was written in the 5th century. "It is preferable to subdue an enemy by famine, raids, or terror than in battle, where fortune tends to have more influence than bravery." Alright guys, I hope you liked today's video. I know it was a bit short, but I have been trying to work on the audio and the video quality. I'm kind of doing this all on a pretty low budget, and I know it turned out fairly bad last time. So let me know what you think. If you've got anything, let me know if I got anything wrong, or if you disagree with anything that I'm saying in this video. And if you like it, and if you subscribe, hopefully I'll see you guys again. Thanks. Bye.